Wheels of Justice, The Road to Redemption. Life doesn't stop when your legs do. Sometimes, that's when the real journey begins. The day everything changed. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the bike lane as Michael Chen pedaled steadily homeward. At 28, he was in the prime of his life. A respected physical therapist with his own growing practice, engaged to be married to his college sweetheart, and training for his third marathon. The late September air had that perfect crispness that made cycling a joy rather than a chore. Michael checked his watch, 9:35 p.m. He'd stayed late at the clinic to accommodate a teenage athlete recovering from ACL surgery. The boy reminded Michael of himself 10 years earlier, driven, optimistic, convinced of his own invincibility. Michael smiled at the memory as he approached the intersection of Maple and Fifth. The light turned green. Michael pushed off. He never saw the black Maserati. The security camera at the convenience store captured it all. The luxury sports car barreling through the red light at 67 miles per hour in a 35 zone, the driver's head bent downward, presumably looking at his phone. The timestamp on the footage read 9:47 p.m. In the 3 seconds that followed, Michael Chen's life trajectory altered permanently. The sound came first, the screech of expensive tires trying desperately to grip asphalt, the sickening thud of metal meeting flesh and bone, the tinkling cascade of broken glass. For Michael, these were the last sounds he would hear before waking up in County General Hospital 3 days later. "Mr. Chen? Michael? Can you hear me?" The voice seemed to come from the end of a long tunnel. Michael fought to open his eyes, the harsh fluorescent lights sending spikes of pain through his skull. What happened?" His throat felt like sandpaper. Dr. Amelia Santos exchanged glances with the nurse beside her before answering. "You were in an accident, Michael. A car hit you at an intersection. You've been unconscious for 3 days. Something in her tone made Michael's stomach clench. "How bad?" Dr. Santos placed a gentle hand on his arm, a gesture he would later recognize as the universal prelude to devastating news. "The impact caused severe trauma to your spinal cord at the 10th thoracic vertebra. It's what we call a complete injury." Michael, with his medical background, understood immediately what that meant, but his mind refused to process it. "No," he whispered. That can't be right." "I'm so sorry, Michael. The damage is irreversible. You won't be able to walk again." The room seemed to close in around him. "The driver?" he managed to ask. The nurse, whose name tag read Eleanor, answered quietly. "James Hayes, son of Carlton Hayes." Even through the fog of painkillers and shock, Michael recognized the name. Everyone in the city knew the Hayes family. Carlton Hayes, the real estate magnate whose company had transformed the city skyline over the past 2 decades. His face appeared on billboards throughout the city, his name on half the new developments downtown. "He was drunk," Eleanor added, a slight edge to her voice. "And texting." Michael closed his eyes, feeling the weight of this new reality pressing down on him. In a single moment, a stranger's recklessness had rewritten his entire future. "Your parents are in the waiting room," Dr. Santos said gently, "and your fiancée, Vanessa, has barely left your side since you were brought in. Would you like to see them?" Michael nodded numbly, though he wasn't sure how he would face them, how he would face anyone, as half the person he had been just 3 days ago, the first fall. The next few weeks passed in a blur of surgeries, consultations, and the beginning of what would be a grueling physical therapy regimen. Michael learned medical terminology he had never wanted to know personally: pressure sores, neurogenic bladder, autonomic dysreflexia. He had spent years helping others regain mobility. Now he struggled to maneuver himself from bed to wheelchair. His parents, immigrants who had worked tirelessly to provide him opportunities, watched helplessly as their only son faced challenge after challenge. His father, traditionally stoic, broke down one evening while helping Michael back into bed. "I'm sorry, son," he whispered in Mandarin. "I would take this burden from you if I could." Michael squeezed his father's hand. "I know, Ba, I know." Vanessa, his fiancée of 2 years, tried her best. She attended every therapy session, took notes during doctor consultations, and researched adaptive equipment late into the night. But as weeks turned into months, Michael could see the strain in her eyes, feel the hesitation in her touch. "We should set a new wedding date," she suggested one evening, her voice too bright, too forced. "Maybe next summer?" The venue said they could accommodate us with the changes. Michael looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in weeks. Her eyes were shadowed with exhaustion, her smile brittle. "You don't have to do this, Vanessa," he said quietly. "Do what?" "Plan our wedding? Of course I do." "Stay. You don't have to stay." Tears welled in her eyes. "Don't say that. I love you." "I know you do. But this isn't what you signed up for. For better or worse, remember? We may not have said the vows yet, but I meant them." But 3 months later, after a particularly difficult day when Michael had yelled at her for trying to help him into the shower, Vanessa sat on the edge of his bed with red-rimmed eyes. "I can't do this anymore, Michael," she whispered. "I thought I was strong enough, but I'm not. I'm so sorry." She placed her engagement ring on the nightstand, the diamond catching the dim light. Michael said nothing as she walked out, his heart breaking not because she was leaving, but because a small, terrible part of him felt relieved that she would be spared the life stretching before him. That night, alone in the apartment they had chosen together, the one now modified with ramps and grab bars, Michael hit his first bottom. He knocked the ring to the floor and screamed until his voice gave out, cursing his useless legs, cursing James Hayes, cursing the world that had taken everything from him. The legal battle begins. 6 months after the accident, Michael sat across from Lawrence Friedman, the personal injury attorney recommended by one of his former colleagues. "The good news," Friedman said, shuffling through papers, "is that liability is clear. Hayes was drunk texting and ran a red light. The security footage is unambiguous." "And the bad news?" Michael asked, already sensing there would be a significant but coming. "The bad news is that the Hayes family has retained Pritchard and Lowe. They're one of the most aggressive defense firms in the state, specializing in shielding wealthy clients from consequences." "So, what does that mean for me?" Friedman sighed, removing his glasses. "It means they're offering a settlement of $250,000. It's insultingly low considering your medical expenses, ongoing care needs, lost income, and pain and suffering." Michael almost laughed. $250,000? My medical bills already exceed that. And I've lost my practice, my livelihood, not to mention... He gestured at his wheelchair. "I know," Friedman said grimly, "and normally I'd tell you to reject it outright. But here's the thing, Michael. They'll drag this out. Years, potentially. They know you're facing financial pressure. They're betting you'll get desperate enough to accept whatever they offer rather than wait for a trial date. Can't we fast-track it somehow?" "There's clear evidence. Hayes Sr. has connections throughout the local judiciary. Every motion will face delays. Every request will be contested. Meanwhile, your bills keep mounting." Michael stared out the window at the city skyline, at the gleaming tower bearing the Hayes name. "So that's it? They can just buy their way out of responsibility?" "I didn't say that," Friedman replied. "I'm just preparing you for a long fight and asking if you can financially sustain yourself through it." The truth was, Michael couldn't. His savings were depleted. His practice was running at a fraction of its former capacity under his assistant's management. His disability insurance helped, but wasn't enough. and the modifications to his apartment and vehicle had cost tens of thousands. 2 weeks later, as Michael stared at yet another pile of medical bills, he made the call to Friedman. "Tell them I'll take the settlement," he said, defeat heavy in his voice. "Michael, are you sure? Once you accept—" "I'm sure. I can't keep fighting. I need to start rebuilding what's left of my life." That evening, watching the local news, Michael saw Carlton Hayes cutting a ribbon at the opening of his newest luxury apartment complex. "Hayes Luxury Living isn't just about buildings," the tycoon said smoothly into the microphones. "It's about building dreams, building futures. That's my commitment to this city." Michael hurled his glass at the television screen, watching as both shattered. An unexpected ally. 3 weeks later, as Michael struggled to adapt to his new financial reality, downsizing to a smaller, wheelchair-accessible apartment in a less desirable neighborhood, he received an unexpected visitor. Elena Rodriguez had been one of his most determined patients, a former dancer who had suffered nerve damage after a car accident 2 years earlier. Michael had worked with her for months, helping her regain enough function to walk with only a slight limp. When he had closed his private practice, Elena had been among the patients he'd referred to colleagues. "This place is a dump," were her first words as she wheeled herself into his new apartment. Michael raised an eyebrow at her directness but couldn't argue. The building was run down, the elevator frequently out of order, forcing him to rely on neighbors to help him navigate the stairs on bad days. "Nice to see you too, Elena," he replied dryly. "What brings you here?" Elena pulled a business card from her purse and placed it on his cluttered table. "My cousin just passed the bar exam. She's working for Jacobson and Partners now." Michael glanced at the card. "Good for her, but I've already settled my case, such as it was." "I know. Word gets around." Elena leaned forward. "Michael, you were the best therapist I ever had. You pushed me when others said I'd reached my maximum recovery. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself, and now you're just giving up?" "I'm not giving up. I'm being realistic. The Hayes family has unlimited resources and connections. I have—" He gestured around the shabby apartment. "Sophia, my cousin, says you settled too soon. She says there's a case not just against the son, but against Carlton Hayes himself. Something about negligent entrustment and the fact that it was a company car." Michael shook his head. "Even if that's true, I've signed the settlement, which covered medical expenses to date and perhaps a year of care. What about the rest of your life, Michael? You're 28 inches. Why does your cousin care?" Elena's eyes flashed. "Because Jacobson and Partners specializes in taking down corporate giants, and because 2 years ago her brother was killed by a drunk driver who got off with community service because his father was friends with the judge. This isn't just a case to her. It's a mission." Michael stared at the business card for a long moment. "The Hayes family practically owns this city. Nobody wants to go against them." "She does," Elena said simply, "and she wants to meet you." Restart. Sophia Martinez's office at Jacobson and Partners was modest compared to Friedman's plush surroundings, but there was an energy in the space that Michael hadn't felt in his previous attorney's presence. "The settlement you signed covers claims against James Hayes personally," Sophia explained, poring over the documents Michael had brought. "But it doesn't preclude action against Carlton Hayes or Hayes Enterprises. There's a separate liability there." "How so?" Michael asked, a small flame of hope flickering for the first time in months. "The vehicle James was driving was registered to Hayes Enterprises. It was a company car, not his personal vehicle. Under the doctrine of negligent entrustment, a company can be held liable for allowing an employee, in this case an executive who happens to be the owner's son, to use a company vehicle when they know or should have known that person posed an unreasonable risk." "And you think you can prove they knew?" Sophia's smile was sharp. "James Hayes has 3 previous DUIs, Michael. 2 were handled quietly through his father's connections. records sealed, charges reduced to reckless driving. But they exist. And I'm betting there are people at Hayes Enterprises who were aware of the problem and did nothing. Whistleblowers, emails, internal memos warning about liability concerns. Even if all that exists, taking on Hayes means taking on Pritchard and Lowe again. They'll bury us in motions and delays. Sophia leaned forward, her eyes intense. Let them try. Unlike your previous counsel, we have the resources and the patience to match them motion for motion. We work on contingency, Michael. You pay nothing unless we win. And if we lose? We won't, she said with such conviction that, despite himself, Michael began to believe her. That night, for the first time since the accident, Michael slept without nightmares. The long road. The legal battle that followed was every bit as grueling as Friedman had predicted, but with one key difference. Sophia Martinez and Jacobson and partners weren't intimidated. For every delay tactic Pritchard and Lowe employed, Sophia had a counter-strategy. When they buried her in paperwork, she hired paralegals specifically to process it. When they filed motion after motion to dismiss, she responded with meticulously researched oppositions. Meanwhile, Michael faced his own battles. Physical therapy continued to be a painful, exhausting process. The settlement money from James Hayes was rapidly depleting, and the depression that had shadowed him since the accident deepened as the case dragged into its second year. I don't know if I can keep doing this, he admitted to Elena during one of her now regular visits. Every day is a struggle just to exist, let alone fight a legal battle that might drag on for years. Elena, never one to offer empty platitudes, studied him thoughtfully. You need a purpose beyond the lawsuit. Like what? I can barely take care of myself, let alone help anyone else. That's bullshit, and you know it, she replied bluntly. Your body changed, not your mind, not your training, not your compassion. The next day, Elena arrived with a proposition. She volunteered at a community center that offered various services to underserved populations, including a support group for those with mobility issues. Their regular facilitator had moved out of state. They need someone who understands both the physical and emotional challenges, she explained. Someone who can speak from experience but also from professional knowledge. I don't know, Elena. I'm not exactly a poster child for positive adjustment to disability. Maybe helping others find their way will help you find yours. Reluctantly, Michael agreed to attend one session. What he found there changed everything. The group was diverse, a teenager adjusting to life after a diving accident, an elderly man dealing with complications from diabetes, a middle-aged woman with multiple sclerosis, and several others with varying conditions. They shared frustrations Michael recognized intimately. The indignity of needing help with basic tasks, the social isolation, the constant battle with a world not designed for their needs. As he listened to their stories, something shifted in Michael. For months, he had been focused entirely on what he had lost. But here were people facing similar challenges who had found ways to adapt, to find joy, to continue living meaningful lives. By the end of the session, when he found himself offering advice about managing spasticity to the teenager, Michael realized that while his body might be broken, his knowledge and ability to help others remained intact. The following week, he returned, and the week after that. He began to look forward to the meetings, to feeling useful again. When the community center learned of his background, they asked if he would consider offering basic consultation services to those who couldn't afford traditional physical therapy. Gradually, Michael's days regained structure and purpose. The lawsuit continued in the background, depositions, discovery, the slow, grinding wheels of justice. But it was no longer the center of his existence. 6 months into his volunteer work, Michael started a YouTube channel, Rolling Forward. Initially, it was simply a way to share adaptive techniques and exercises with group members who couldn't always attend in person. But as he began documenting his daily challenges and small victories, something unexpected happened. People responded. Comments poured in from others with spinal cord injuries, from family members seeking to understand their loved ones' experiences, from medical professionals looking to better serve their patients. Michael's honesty about his struggles, alongside his practical tips for navigating a world not built for wheels, resonated deeply. Today marks 2 years since the accident that took my ability to walk, he said in one video that would later go viral. For a long time, I thought it took everything. I was wrong. It took my legs, yes, but it also gave me a new perspective, a new purpose, and a new community. I'm not saying I wouldn't choose to walk again if I could, but I am saying that a life from this height still has depth, still has meaning. 3 years after Michael Chen was struck by James Hayes' Maserati, the case against Carlton Hayes and Hayes Enterprises finally went to trial. The courtroom was packed, partly due to the prominence of the defendant, partly due to Michael's growing platform as an advocate for accessibility and disability rights. His YouTube channel now had over 300,000 subscribers, and he had recently launched a podcast interviewing others who had rebuilt their lives after traumatic injuries. Sofia Martinez's opening statement was powerful in its simplicity. This case, she told the rapt jury, is about responsibility. Not just the responsibility of a young man who made the tragic choice to drink and drive, but the responsibility of a father and CEO who enabled that behavior, who protected his son from consequences until those consequences became too devastating to hide. Carlton Hayes, immaculate in an expensive suit, sat stone-faced at the defense table, refusing to meet Michael's eyes. The evidence Sofia presented over the following days was damning. The security footage of the crash, played in slow motion, caused several jurors to wince visibly. The toxicology report showing James Hayes' blood alcohol level at 0.19, more than twice the legal limit. The text messages retrieved from his phone sent moments before impact. OMW, too drunk to type LOL, followed by a string of emojis. But the real bombshell came in the form of internal Hayes Enterprises emails. Through aggressive discovery motions, Sofia had unearthed communications showing that Carlton Hayes had been warned about his son's drinking and driving by 3 separate employees over the 2 years preceding the accident. In one email from the company's risk management officer, dated just 3 months before the crash, the warning was explicit. James's continued use of company vehicles while impaired represents a serious liability concern. This behavior has been observed on multiple occasions by staff and should be addressed immediately. Carlton's response, damning in its brevity, handle it quietly. No paper trail. Your Honor, Sofia argued on the 5th day of trial, these documents clearly establish that the defendant not only failed to prevent a known danger, but actively concealed it. This wasn't an accident. It was an inevitability they chose to ignore. The defense team from Pritchard and Lowe fought back vigorously, attempting to paint James as a rogue employee who had deceived his father about his sobriety. They brought character witnesses praising Carlton's business ethics, his philanthropy, his community involvement. But their case began to crumble when Sofia called an unexpected witness, Amanda Torres, James Hayes' former executive assistant. Ms. Torres, Sofia asked, did you ever observe James Hayes under the influence of alcohol during business hours? Amanda, visibly nervous, nodded. Yes, at least twice a week, particularly after lunch meetings. And did you ever express concern about this to Carlton Hayes? Yes, about a year before the accident, after James drove off the road coming back from a client meeting. No one was hurt, but the company car was damaged. And what was Mr. Hayes' response? Amanda glanced at her former employer before answering. He said, and I quote, He's a Hayes. Hayes men work hard and play hard. Fix the car and keep this between us. By the time closing arguments arrived, the courtroom atmosphere had shifted palpably. Carlton Hayes no longer projected confidence, but sat tensely, occasionally whispering urgently to his attorneys. When the verdict came 2 days later, Michael wasn't prepared for the amount. $12.7 million in compensatory damages and another $25 million in punitive damages against Carlton Hayes personally. As the numbers were read, Michael felt no triumph, no vindication, only a profound sense of closing one chapter of his life and opening another. Justice, he had learned, didn't heal his spinal cord, but it did offer the resources to rebuild his life on his own terms. Outside the courthouse, surrounded by reporters, Michael faced the cameras from his wheelchair. "Money doesn't make my legs work again," he said calmly, "but today sends a message that no one is above accountability, no matter how wealthy or powerful they are. The real victory for me isn't financial. It's knowing that perhaps the next time someone like Carlton Hayes is warned about a dangerous situation they can prevent, they'll remember this case and choose to act differently." The Rise. The years following the verdict transformed Michael's life in ways he could never have imagined that night in the hospital when he first learned he would never walk again. The first thing he did with the settlement money, after paying Sophia's firm their well-earned contingency fee, was purchase a small building on the city's east side, a historically underserved area with limited medical facilities. There, he established the Chen Rehabilitation Center, specifically designed for those with spinal cord injuries, particularly those who couldn't afford comprehensive care elsewhere. "When I was injured," he explained at the center's opening, "I had insurance, savings, education, and a support system, and I still barely survived financially. Too many people don't have those advantages. This center is for them." His YouTube channel and podcast, Rolling Forward, continued to grow, eventually reaching millions of viewers worldwide. What had begun as a personal coping mechanism evolved into a platform advocating for accessibility, healthcare reform, and disability rights. The advertising revenue and sponsorships now funded scholarships for patients who needed extended therapy at his center. Michael's journey also led him to unexpected personal happiness. During a disability rights conference where he was a featured speaker, he met Dr. Layla Washington, a neuroscientist researching spinal cord regeneration. "I'm not promising miracles," she told him over coffee after his presentation, "but I am promising that science isn't standing still on this. The injury that paralyzed you today might not mean permanent paralysis for someone 10 years from now." Their professional relationship blossomed into friendship and eventually into love. Unlike Vanessa, Layla had chosen a life immersed in the realities of disability and never treated Michael as someone diminished by his condition. On their wedding day, 3 years after they met, Michael delivered his vows from his wheelchair, while Layla sat in a chair beside him, holding his hands at eye level. "I once thought my life ended the night my legs stopped working," he told her, his voice steady despite the emotion. "I was wrong. It was just beginning a different path, one that led me to you." Full circle. 5 years to the day after the verdict against Carlton Hayes, Michael wheeled through the expanded facilities of the Chen Rehabilitation Center. What had begun as a modest clinic now occupied an entire city block with state-of-the-art equipment, a research division collaborating with Dr. Washington's lab, and a training program for therapists specializing in spinal cord injuries. As he approached the aquatic therapy area, the newest addition to the center, he noticed an unfamiliar older man watching a therapy session through the glass wall. Something about his posture seemed familiar. With a jolt of recognition, Michael realized he was looking at Carlton Hayes. The real estate tycoon had aged considerably in the 5 years since the trial. His once imposing frame had diminished, his hair now completely gray. But it was the expression on his face that struck Michael most. the look of someone haunted by regret. Michael hesitated only briefly before wheeling himself closer. "Mr. Hayes." Carlton turned, startled, his eyes widening as he recognized Michael. For a moment, the two men simply regarded each other in silence, the man whose life had been forever altered and the man who had failed to prevent it. "Michael." Carlton's voice was rougher than Michael remembered from the trial. I didn't expect to see you here." "It is my center," Michael replied evenly. Carlton nodded, looking away. "Yes, of course." He gestured toward the pool, where a physical therapist was working with a young boy. "That's my grandson, Tommy. He has cerebral palsy." Michael watched the boy's determined expression as he worked to move his limbs against the water's resistance, a look he recognized from countless therapy sessions of his own. "We have an excellent pediatric program," Michael said after a moment. "Some of the best therapists in the country." "Yes, that's what we've heard." His previous therapists weren't. They didn't believe he could improve much more. "We wanted a second opinion." The irony hung between them, that Carlton Hayes would seek help from the very man whose life his family had upended. "How is James?" Michael asked, surprising himself with the question. Carlton's face tightened. "Sober. 3 years now. The accident, your accident, it eventually became his wake-up call. Too late, I know." They fell silent again, watching Tommy's therapy session. "I thought about reaching out," Carlton finally said. "After the trial, to apologize. My lawyers advised against it." "Would it have been sincere?" Michael asked. "Not then," Carlton admitted. "I was angry, self-righteous. I blamed everyone but myself." He looked directly at Michael. "But yes, it would be sincere now. I am deeply sorry, Michael. Not just for what James did, but for my part in it. For every warning I ignored, for every time I protected him from consequences that might have prevented this." Michael studied the man before him, diminished, humbled, but finally acknowledging his role in the tragedy that had reshaped both their lives. "There was a time when your apology would have meant nothing to me," Michael said honestly, "when all I wanted was for you to suffer as I had suffered. But that's not who I want to be anymore." He extended his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Carlton shook it. "Your grandson is welcome here," Michael said, "and so are you." As Carlton turned back to watch the therapy session, Michael wheeled away, feeling a weight he hadn't realized he still carried lift from his shoulders. The path that had brought him here had been unimaginably difficult, marked by loss and struggle and pain, but it had also led to purpose, to love, to impact he might never have had on his original trajectory. Later that evening, preparing for a live session of his now weekly webcast, Michael reflected on the day's unexpected encounter. When the camera light blinked on, he smiled at his audience of thousands. "Today, I want to talk about forgiveness," he began. "Not as a gift you give to someone else, but as a way of finally putting down a burden you never deserved to carry in the first place." As he spoke, Michael realized that while justice had been delayed, his life hadn't been. In fact, it had only just begun. "Sometimes the greatest journeys forward begin with a world that's turned upside down," he concluded. "This isn't just my story. It's a testament to what happens when you refuse to let others define your path, even when they've determined how you'll travel it." In the comments section, viewers from around the world shared their own stories of trauma and resilience, of building new lives from the ruins of old ones. And in a city thousands of miles away, a young man named James Hayes watched silently, his 3-year sobriety chip clutched tightly in his hand, finally ready to begin his own journey toward redemption. The end.